Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views of myself, Salailo Makwidiri. We're still moving on with the show, and now we're edging closer to home. The South African Federation of Trade Unions, or SAFTU, has raised serious concerns about the World Bank recent approval of a 26 billion rand loan to South Africa. The loan is meant to support structural reforms and infrastructure development, but SAFTU warns it could deepen the country's dependence on foreign creditors and lead to more austerity measures. We've seen the recent budget speech and the measure of austerity, within it. And SAFTU is warning that we could see more of that if we continue with the loans from the World Bank and other international lenders. And to help us discuss this further, we're joined by Newton Masuku, SAFTU's national spokesperson. Newton, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I really appreciate you giving us your time. I think we can kickstart the conversation with just explaining some of SAFTU's main concerns about this 26 billion rand loan from the World Bank.
Yeah, well, we have characterized the loan as nothing but a neoliberal Trojan horse in our statement, whose belly is pumped full of deregulation of the labor market, privatization of state-owned entities by stealth, and so on and so forth. You'll remember that the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, and of course the World Trade Organization, are notorious for meddling into the internal affairs of countries. The World Bank and the IMF in particular use the loans that they disperse to countries that are in distress to impose their own policy prescriptions, what they prefer as the way in which an economy ought to be run. And we maintain that this particular loan will come with that. In fact, last week, the General Secretary pointed out that we seem to be regressing to an era of structural adjustment policies in which the World Bank and the IMF would dispense loans and impose conditionalities. And those conditionalities had to do with how the country ought to structure its policies and how to grow the economy. We take serious issue with that. But secondly, is that the loan is denominated in dollars. Now, one of the major problems with taking a loan denominated in dollars is that you are effectively surrendering your sovereignty to the monetary policy of that of the country in which you have taken the loan, whose currency you have taken the loan in. In this case, it's the US. If the loan is denominated in dollars, means that we are at the mercy of the Federal Reserve, and each time it raises interest rate, it automatically and by definition increases the repayment cost of that particular loan. So we are at the mercy in that sense. But thirdly is the question of just democracy, the democratic aspect of it. Within the limited framework of capitalist democracy, the people elect public representatives, and the public representatives are supposed to structure policy and implement it on behalf of the public and in alignment with the wishes of the public, at least formally. But once you allow international financial institutions to disperse loans, to lend you money and impose conditionalities that dictate the policies you ought to take, it means that therefore the democratic aspect has been eroded and has been in fact transferred to unaccountable financial institutions, international financial institutions, and we take serious issue with that.
Well, the obvious question to that would be, what alternative approaches would SAFTU recommend to government to address infrastructure and economic challenges without necessarily relying on foreign loans?
Well, we have pointed out that the state, unlike the way it is conceptualized by the neoliberals in government, the state is not a household. Therefore, the state has the capacity to spend beyond the revenue it collects, unlike a household. And therefore, the state has the capacity to do what we call deficit spending, to be able to spend in a channeled way, in a directed way, in infrastructure development in this case, to be able to ignite growth. And as the economy grow, the debt to GDP ratio that they are obsessed about will begin to shrink. But secondly is that during the higgling and haggling of the budget debate, which culminated in Budget 3.0, when the finance minister wanted to increase the VAT, We pointed out that we do not agree with the increasing of the VAT, and we called for the taxing of the rich in this country. We said they must increase capital gains tax, they must increase corporate tax, they must increase luxury goods tax, and so on. We enumerated a number of revenue sources that can be used to be able to garner sufficient revenue so that you can begin to finance infrastructure development and all of that. So we do not believe that it was necessary for this loan to be taken. The state has means, as I've indicated, to be able to do that.
Is there a way that the government can go about these loans and the conditions that they entail without necessarily increasing debt and austerity, which will ultimately affect the laymen and women in South Africa? Is there a way, to work around it that, the people don't feel the proverbial pinch, so to say?
No, there isn't a way. I mean, as I've said, these loans come with conditionalities. The World Bank, when it lends you money, it imposes policy prescriptions that it thinks will enable you to repay back, to repay the loan. And amongst other things, of course, it has prescribed what it calls the public-private partnerships to revamp infrastructure and to revamp in particular the SOEs, Transnet and Eskom. But we take issue with the public-private partnerships, of course, and we have pointed it out a number of times, that what they imply is that the public carries the risk on behalf of the private sector, and the private sector reaps the profit in the development of those infrastructure. So it is the socialization of risk and the privatization of profits. We take serious issue with that. But also there's no reason why we should believe that once the private sector has been introduced, there will be so-called efficiency in the provision of services to the public. If anything, the likelihood is that the public, the overwhelming majority of whom are the working class, will no longer be able to access those services, because history has taught us that once you introduce the private sector, which is concerned primarily with the profit motive, it begins to erode the extent to which the public can access services, especially the working class and the poor. So there's no way they're going to avoid austerity and the policy prescriptions that come with that particular loan. And we already see it, by the way, with the move by the South African Reserve Bank to reduce the inflation target. Now, as things stand, it is between 3% and 6%, but they want to reduce it to just 3%. That implies monetary austerity, by the way. It means they are trying to curtail domestic demand so that you do not have too many imports coming into the country, and therefore draining foreign exchange reserves and foreign currency reserves that would have to be used to repay that particular loan. That's the one aspect of it from the monetary policy side. But also there's the fiscal policy side. The National Treasury is obsessed with attaining what it calls the primary budget surpluses, which means, which by definition is a formula for austerity. And indeed, in the document, for instance, the country partnership framework that was signed by the National Treasury and the South African Reserve Bank in 2021, pointed out that the National Treasury must rigorously engage in fiscal consolidation. And fiscal consolidation, we know in neoliberal talk, speaks to austerity, budget cuts to health, education, and so on and so forth. So that is unavoidable. And that's one of the reasons why we take serious issue with this particular law.
All right. I think we're going to run that note. Newton Masuku, SAFTU National Spokesperson, thank you so much for chatting to us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
There you go. We're going to take a quick break. News and views will continue after this.